the invisible weight that no one sees. Imagine carrying a weight so heavy, it shapes every decision you make. Yet, no one else can see it. This is the silent burden many men bear. From the moment a boy is born, the world begins to mold him. Not with love and freedom, but with unspoken expectations. Be strong, be tough, provide, endure. Never cry, never break, never ask for help. It's not a choice. It's a script handed down through generations, deeply woven into what it means to be a man. This burden doesn't scream. It whispers. Every time you're told to man up, every time you're praised for being stoic while your heart is breaking inside, you carry it at work when you're expected to succeed without rest. You carry it at home when you're expected to lead without faltering. You carry it in silence because that's what you were taught strength looks like. But what happens when no one asks if you're okay? When no one notices the exhaustion behind your smile? The truth is, this invisible weight doesn't just shape your actions. It buries your emotions, your voice, your sense of self. And still, the world applauds your ability to endure. But at what cost? You were never meant to carry this alone. The question is, who gave you this burden in the first place? And more importantly, how long will you keep carrying it before you finally allow yourself to let it down? Who decided what it means to be a man? Have you ever stopped, truly stopped, and asked yourself, who decided this is what a man should be? Who defined this narrow image of masculinity we carry like armor, day after day? Who told us that to be a man means to never bend, never break, never feel too deeply? We live in the shadow of old ideals, passed down through culture, history and myth. Stories of warriors, conquerors, lone heroes who rose without help and suffered without complaint. We were taught to admire them, but no one ever questioned the cost. Look closer, and you'll see the cracks behind the glory. Achilles, the mighty Greek warrior, was hailed for his strength. Yet his life was a tragedy. Trapped by a role he never chose, unable to escape the fate written for him. He was never allowed to be anything but a fighter. And in many ways, that's still true for men today. We're told our worth lies in how much we can withstand, not in who we are, but in how well we perform under pressure. But what if that idea is broken? What if it never served us at all? What if masculinity wasn't a rigid script, but something we could rewrite, something more human, more whole? The world told us what being a man should look like. But maybe the greatest strength lies in daring to ask, who am I beneath it all when no one is watching? The roles we inherit, the battles we hide. Every man walks through life carrying invisible roles, scripts etched into his identity before he even understands who he is. Psychologist Carl Jung called them archetypes: the warrior, the king, the magician, the lover. Each one reflects a piece of masculinity, a different face we wear depending on what the world demands of us. The warrior is told to fight, never retreat, never feel, never fall. The king must lead, decisive, responsible, always in control, yet silently isolated. The magician seeks wisdom, but must stay detached, emotionless in his pursuit. And the lover, perhaps the most human of all, aches for connection, but is taught to silence his heart, to keep tenderness hidden behind a stoic mask. We try to live up to these ideals, but rarely do we speak of the price we pay. These archetypes are not just symbols. They become expectations, cages disguised as crowns. And when we fail to embody them perfectly, we feel shame, we feel broken, like we're not man enough. But maybe the truth is this: no man was ever meant to live only one role. We are not just warriors, not just providers, not just protectors. We are complex, emotional beings, capable of leading and feeling, of thinking deeply and loving fully. So ask yourself, what part of you have you buried to meet the world's expectations? And what would happen if, instead of playing the role, you allowed yourself to simply be real? Where it all begins, the first lessons in silence. It starts earlier than we remember, before we even know what emotions truly are. A scraped knee, a tear rolling down a young boy's face, and suddenly the world leans in and says, "Toughen up. Boys don't cry. Be a man." These aren't just harmless phrases. They are the first bricks in a wall we're taught to build around our hearts. One lesson at a time, boys learn that emotions are a weakness, not a part of being human. They learn that pain should be swallowed, not spoken. That fear must be hidden. That softness must be buried. By the time a boy becomes a man, that wall is fully formed, thick, heavy, and nearly impenetrable. He smiles when he's hurting. He stays silent when he's breaking. He carries grief, stress, and sadness in secret. Not because he wants to, but because he was never taught another way. And society applauds him for it, calls him strong, calls him dependable. But inside, he may feel hollow, disconnected not only from others, but from himself. This is how emotional suppression becomes a norm, not a choice. A learned survival mechanism passed from generation to generation. But what if we broke that cycle? What if we told our sons, it's okay to feel? What if we started teaching a different lesson? One where strength and softness could coexist? Because maybe the most damaging lie we've ever told our boys is that they have to be silent to be strong. The silent contract, strength without emotion. There's a contract every man signs, though no one ever shows it to him. It's not written in ink, but in glances, in comments, in expectations that echo through childhood and follow into adulthood. The message is clear. Be strong. Be silent. Don't let them see you break. This contract tells men that their worth is measured by how much they can carry without ever asking for help. It rewards stoicism, praises quiet suffering, and calls emotional distance a virtue. A man who hides his pain is admired. A man who reveals it is questioned, pitied, or worse, ridiculed. Everyday life becomes a performance. At work, he powers through stress without flinching. In relationships, he listens but rarely opens up. With friends, he laughs but never admits the weight he carries. And beneath it all, he wonders, does anyone actually see me? Or do they just see the mask I've learned to wear so well? This is the cost of the silent contract. Connection without intimacy, strength without relief, existence without emotional freedom. It's a quiet prison where men learn to cope alone, believing vulnerability is dangerous and emotions are liabilities. But what if that contract was never meant to be signed in the first place? What if the bravest thing a man could do wasn't to stay silent, but to speak, to feel, to be seen as fully human? Because strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the courage to embrace it, even when the world tells you not to. When silence turns into suffering, what happens to all the pain a man never speaks of? Where does the sadness go when he's told to hold it in, to push through, to keep smiling, even when everything inside him is falling apart? It doesn't vanish. It festers. The unspoken struggles, the grief, the anxiety, the self-doubt don't disappear just because no one talks about them. They build. They swell beneath the surface like a storm with nowhere to go. And eventually, they erupt. Maybe not in words, but in other ways. Short tempers, Distant relationships, restless nights, unexplained anger, chronic stress. In some cases, it shows up in addiction, in isolation, in emotional shutdown. And in the most heartbreaking moments, it ends in silence that never finds a voice. When a man takes his own life because he believes there's no other way out. This is what happens when emotion has no outlet, when vulnerability is treated like weakness, when seeking help feels like failure. And yet, society still praises this kind of endurance, still applauds the man who holds it together while his inner world quietly crumbles. But is that truly strength? Or is it just survival dressed in a disguise? Every man has a breaking point, not because he is weak, but because he is human. We were never meant to carry this much alone. We were never meant to suffer in silence and call it strength. So ask yourself, what pain have you buried because you thought no one would understand? Maybe it's time to stop hiding it and start healing from it. When asking for help feels like defeat, why is it that so many men would rather suffer in silence than speak the words, "I need help"? Why does vulnerability feel like surrender, like failure, when in truth, it's one of the bravest things a man can do? But how do you open up when the world expects you to be unshakable? How do you express your fears when you've spent a lifetime learning to bury them? So, instead, men keep it in. They carry their burdens in silence. They shoulder stress, pressure, and emotional fatigue with no outlet, no relief. And the saddest part, many begin to believe this is just how life is supposed to feel. Disconnected, heavy, lonely. But it doesn't have to be this way. True connection starts with honesty, with giving yourself permission to be more than just the role you've been playing. You don't have to face life alone behind a mask, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone see you without it, letting go of the old story. For so long, men have lived by someone else's script. A story written long before they were born. Be the provider, be the protector, be the one who never cracks under pressure. And if you fail to live up to that, you're told you're not enough. But what if that story is outdated? What if it's not strength? It's suffocation. These expectations were built in a world that no longer exists. Yet, they still shape how men see themselves today. They limit not just who you are, but who you're allowed to become. And so many men keep forcing themselves to fit into a mold that was never made for them. One that demands sacrifice, but rarely offers peace. But you have a choice. You don't have to keep carrying the weight of who the world told you to be. You can redefine what strength looks like. You can let go of the silence, the shame, the pressure to be perfect. Because freedom doesn't come from living up to someone else's definition of a man. It comes from finding the courage to create your own. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your true strength begins. Breaking the mold, reclaiming yourself. For generations, men have been handed a silent rulebook, one filled with rigid expectations. Be tough, don't falter, don't feel, provide without rest, endure without complaint. And somewhere along the way, those expectations became chains disguised as purpose. You're told this is strength, that this is what it means to be a man. But deep down, something doesn't feel right. Something feels missing. That's because those rules were never written for your well-being. They were built to mold you into something safe, predictable, acceptable. But who you truly are can't thrive in that narrow space. Your softness, your emotional depth, your need for connection. Those aren't flaws. They're human. They're real. They're powerful. And you don't have to keep living inside someone else's version of manhood. You have the right to step outside that mold, to rewrite the story, To redefine strength, not as silent endurance, but as honest expression, not as isolation, but as connection, not as perfection, but as authenticity. Because real freedom begins the moment you stop trying to prove who you're supposed to be and start embracing who you truly are. The strength of knowing yourself. In a world that constantly demands performance, many men have been taught to measure their worth by what they achieve, not by who they truly are. Success, status, income, those are the benchmarks. But what about self-awareness? What about understanding your own heart, your own fears, your own emotional world? Somewhere along the way, men were taught to seek validation from the outside, through titles, paychecks, and accomplishments. But no one ever showed them how to look inward. No one ever said, "Your strength begins when you know yourself." The truth is, self-knowledge isn't weakness. It's power. It's clarity. It's freedom. When you understand your emotions, your needs, your patterns, you begin to live from a place of truth, not performance. You stop chasing approval and start building a life that actually feels like your own. You were never meant to be a machine. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness begins not with more pressure, but with deeper understanding. So ask yourself, when was the last time you really listened to your own soul? Not what the world expects of you, but what you actually feel. Because that's where real strength lives. Not outside you, but within. You were never meant to do this alone. Somewhere deep inside, many men carry a quiet belief. I have to handle it on my own. It's been drilled in since childhood. This idea that needing others makes you weak. That real men solve their problems in silence, behind closed doors, without ever asking for help. But that belief is a lie. Human beings are wired for connection, for brotherhood, for shared strength. Yet modern masculinity has stripped that away, leaving many men emotionally isolated, surrounded by people, but feeling profoundly alone. You may have friends, co-workers, even a partner, but still feel like there's no safe space to speak your truth. No space to be vulnerable. No space to be fully seen. That isolation becomes a silent ache, a distance not just from others, but from yourself. But what if connection is the very thing you've been missing? What if true strength isn't found in solitary endurance, but in the courage to lean in, to open up, to let others in, to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who understand your struggle? You were never meant to carry this weight alone. There is power in brotherhood. There is healing in shared stories. And there is freedom in knowing you're not the only one trying to hold it all together. Because when men come together, not to compete, but to connect, something shifts, something heals, something finally feels whole. Strength isn't just endurance, it's wholeness. For far too long, strength has been measured by how much a man can endure without breaking, how much pressure he can take, how well he can bury his emotions, hold his pain, and keep going like nothing's wrong. But what if we've misunderstood strength all along? Real strength isn't just about how much you can carry. It's about how fully you can feel. It's about having the courage to be seen, not just as a provider or protector, but as a whole human being, with fears, tenderness, love, and longing. You are not stronger because you hide your emotions. You are stronger when you embrace them. You are not more powerful for standing alone. You are more human when you allow others to stand with you. Strength is not stoicism. It is not silence. It is not numbness. Strength is wholeness. It's resilience with compassion, leadership with vulnerability, confidence with empathy. And the moment you allow yourself to feel, really feel, You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that the world told you to suppress. You don't have to choose between being strong and being soft. You can be both. You were always meant to be both. Because the most powerful version of a man is not the one who hides his pain. It's the one who learns how to heal from it. A new definition of strength. The most powerful lesson we can take from this is simple but profound. You don't have to suffer in silence to prove your strength. Real courage is not about how much pain you can carry alone. It's about having the heart to face it, speak it, and heal from it. For too long, men have been taught that emotions are a weakness, that asking for help is failure, that strength means silence. But that outdated idea of masculinity is breaking men from the inside out. It's time to redefine what it means to be strong. Strength is self-awareness. Strength is vulnerability. Strength is building meaningful connections, seeking support, and choosing growth over isolation. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders to be worthy. You are already enough, as you are. So, take the risk of being real. Talk to someone. Ask yourself what you've been holding in for too long. And most of all, remind yourself that being human is not a flaw. It's your greatest power. Because the moment you stop hiding and start healing is the moment you begin to truly live.